we keep losing the momentum of midwifery. Like midwifery's having its moment. Like it had its moment in the 70s. It had its moment in the 80s. It had its moment. Midwifery keeps having its moment, but we keep getting crushed. And I think a lot of when we get crushed is we crush ourselves. I've had some really hard things happen with other midwives, very hard things. And I've had really hard things happen with doctors. And I think that the other biggest fear is that the people with the greatest amount of passion get crushed.
Hey everyone, before we get into this episode, we wanted to give a big shout out to our sponsor. Redmond Life offers simple, clean, and real products like Redmond Real Salt, Relight Hydration, and Redmond Clay. Their salt comes from an ancient, untouched seabed packed with trace minerals your body needs. Redmond Relight is a hydration drink made with clean, natural sodium plus 2 types of magnesium, potassium, and calcium. Perfect for pregnancy and postpartum wellness. And for life's little emergencies, Redmond Clay's healing powers are unmatched, from bee stings to diaper rash. You can learn more at redmond.life. We're also super excited to announce that Dopplers are back in stock on our website, midwiferywisdom.com.
It's such a pleasure to have you both here, and it's such a pleasure to have you both knowing each other, because I really look up to both of you and I'm so excited.
Well, I knew Elizabeth because I was a young aspiring midwife, and Elizabeth would never remember me because I was just one of many young aspiring midwives who sat at her knees, kneeled at her knees. You know, I was showing these books to all the people who are just joined the call that this and spiritual midwifery were my first textbooks when I trained as at that time we called ourselves lay midwives, and that was in the Bay Area. And Elizabeth and I were both part of something called BAGM, which was the Bay Area Guild of Midwives in the, late 70s, early 80s. So Elizabeth was one of my mentors and has remained a mentor.
There was, I was part of that group before Heart and Hands came out.
I know.
I started in 77 and I wasn't anybody. I was just another renegade, quote, criminal midwife, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, Heart and Hands coming out was a huge turning point in my life. And I actually wrote it out of desperation. I don't know if you knew that, Whitney, but there were some not very nice midwives at that time in the Bay Area. And they spread terrible rumors about me and my partner. And I just started writing down everything I knew. And it wasn't really to be published. It was just to affirm to myself that I had a grip, that I was competent and I could do this. And a friend of mine who was an author took a look at it and said, I think I could get this published. And I was like, published? Why? Or what? But it hit the market at this kind of do-it-yourself moment in publishing. And the publisher, in fact, that took the book was the same one that published How to Keep Your Volkswagen Alive and The People's Guide to Mexico. And so mine was How to Be a Guide to Midwifery was the title of the first edition before everybody called it Heart and Hands. So that's what it became. So I've just been really lucky.
Well, Elizabeth, I love and kind of hate what came up is that there were some midwives who were really mean. And I have to say that is still true. And so that kind of leads me into my first most challenging question, which is, what are you both the most afraid of for the future of midwifery?
I would love to hear Elizabeth tell that story about when the midwives were mean in the 70s, because I think if she told the story, we could all resonate with a current story in our lives. My biggest fear is that midwives keep reinventing the wheel. Midwives keep doing and starting over. This book has all the information we effing need. And yet we're constantly republishing and rewriting and redoing and one-upping and then join the medical model and having to publish in the medical way and doing the slides in the medical way. I get so discouraged when I hear a young midwife being so happy because their patients in the hospital are getting to sip clear liquids. I mean, like literally, I've spent my entire professional career lecturing about the safety of eating and drinking in labor. and the necessity of eating and drinking in labor. And the young midwives are still, at least those that practice in a hospital setting, it's like they don't even go back to the past. They're just wanting to reinvent the wheel. So that's my biggest fear, is that we keep losing the momentum of midwifery. Like, midwifery is having its moment. Like, it had its moment in the 70s. It had its moment in the 80s. It had its moment. Midwifery keeps having its moment, but we keep getting crushed. And I think a lot of when we get crushed is we crush ourselves. I've had some really hard things happen with other midwives, very hard things. And I've had really hard things happen with doctors. And I think that the other biggest fear is that the people with the greatest amount of passion get crushed, and they get silenced, and they decide to step away, and they get traumatized, or they have a moral injury and they can't do it anymore. They have a bad outcome and they can't do it anymore. So those are my two biggest fears. Eager to hear yours, Elizabeth.
It's pretty much the same. I was thinking about this. I was thinking this is probably going to be a focus point in this conversation. And I was reminded of Marsden Wagner. And Marsden Wagner was before the time of most of you, and he's passed on, but he was an OB whose son or daughter had a terrible outcome at birth. And he wasn't an OB, he was a perinatologist. That was really his status. After that outcome, he started advocating for midwifery and eventually moved to Europe and became the director for maternal child health of all of Europe. So he was very familiar with what was going on with midwifery in at least
I think he was even an advisor for the World Health Organization in maternal child.
Yes, he was. Yeah. And he was also an advocate in California. When midwives got in trouble, he would literally fly over, appear in court, put up the whiteboard and, rattle out the statistics. I remember the conversation when we all kind of got around him at one point and said, so Marsden, what do you think is the biggest challenge and threat to midwifery? He didn't even stop for a second. He just said autonomy. And we don't have it. And I know it because traveling the world as I have, like I just got back from teaching in Budapest and teaching in Warsaw, Poland, and their scope of practice is just nicked away at from every side. Their skill set is so eroded. And because of those two factors, they're not really practicing midwifery, let alone the emotional, the social aspect, not only of serving the birthing process, but of serving the family and cultivating the kind of strength in mothers that is the backbone of society. We have such a major role to play that extends beyond birth. And that's the whole thing that I try to say to my students. Once upon a time in the good old ages, the scope of practice of the midwife was care from womb to tomb. We were there at every single physiologic marker of growth, maturation through the life cycle. We were honored. We were the most highly esteemed practitioner and elder in the community. And look at us now. Like you said, we're backbiting each other. I mean, that's what oppressed people do. They fight each other. And it's true. So for a solution to that problem and trying to find a way to advance what we do, to truly be the model of care that we began with, that's really the challenge for us right now.
So well said. There's a lot of hope on some of the new generations. And I wonder what about the new generations of midwives makes you really hopeful?
I was going to say their innocence. I don't know why that came to me, but there is a degree of hope and desire for something better. And when my students do pull together in that community spirit and they start going deeper into their own story and looking at their own trauma in a safe way, in a safe space, and being accountable, like one of the assignments I give them is to generate a personal response to the cesarean epidemic and pretty much say, if you don't have a global identity by now, get one, because this is an international issue. And when I say generate a response to this cesarean epidemic, I say, but be sure it is doable for you. Don't try to be too lofty. Don't go beyond your capability. Start with something that you can begin tomorrow. There's so much that they bring to the table and so many ways they encourage each other. And that inspires me. But it takes work. It doesn't happen automatically.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Elizabeth, but I also see a much more diverse group of midwives coming forward that gives me the hugest amount of hope. I see midwives coming from all walks of life, all colors, across economic spectrums, social class, race, gender identity, and that embedded in larger social change movements, that gives me hope. And when I work with these younger, diverse midwives, and I get called out on my stuff, and I learn from them, and they're teaching me as much as I'm teaching them, that gives me hope. That makes me so inspired. And a lot of these young midwives, they are effing badass. I mean, they are people who have come up and have fought for justice their whole lives, and they know how to fight for justice. They know how to fight for connection. They know how to stand up for what's right and wrong in a way that I think this middle generation is kind of how I see it. Like I see a lot of us older midwives who came up in the 70s or the 60s, the 70s, even the early 80s, as part of the feminist women's healthcare movement. Like we were radical. I mean, the first birth I went to was a home birth VBAC in Marin County. I mean, in 1977. I mean, that was brave. Those were brave midwives and those were brave clients. And that ferocity, that capacity is what inspired me. Like, oh yeah, that's what I want to be. That's what I want. That's who I am, the 17-year-old person. That's what I want. I want to feel that. I want to experience that. I want to live that. I want to fight for that. And then we get into this crazy medical, the re-medicalization of birth. Like we can't get rid of fetal monitoring. Like that's the craziest thing that has happened in our world, is electronic fetal monitoring. Literally, Elizabeth, we were part of this movement in the 70s and the 80s of childbirth advocates, which was doctors and nurses and midwives and clients fighting against the cesarean epidemic, because the cesarean delivery rate in the United States had risen from 4 to 8%. We were outraged. We were like fighting cesarean deliveries and calling for VBAC in the 70s and the 80s. And look at where we are now. Like we lost that one. We lost that. We've been in, it's like, I often think about the Jews wandering for 40 years. Like we've had a 40-year sort of wandering of like, should we be in the hospital? Should we be at home? Can the home birth midwives be legitimized at last? Or can we just have birth centers? Can we get birth out of the hospital? And the answer has been hard stop no. It's only been the last 4 years that we've had an increase in out of hospital birth. And that's a response to the pandemic and to obvious social justice issues around maternal mortality and morbidity across racial lines that are no different than they were 50 years ago. That data existed 50 years ago. I was a part of the coalition to fight maternal and infant mortality in inner city Oakland in the late 70s and early 80s, because it was recognized then that Black women and their babies died at a higher rate. These are not new trends. The racial inequity, inequality, racism in healthcare, it's existed before and it's going to continue to exist. But now that I see midwives coming up, much more educated, much more aware, much more justice seekers, much more politically minded, I have hope again. I have hope again.
That's beautifully said and very passionate. And I agree. I mean, I have a lot of diversity in my students, and I do their passion.
It's exciting to see, finally.
Yeah, it's exciting to see and to learn from them, because they're teaching me as much as I am teaching them. I may have the technical skills. I have my passion. Oh my God, I'm an insanely passionate human. But they're teaching me too. They're teaching me a lot of stuff that makes me a better midwife, it makes me a better care provider and makes me keeps me current. And that includes technology. Like these younger midwives, they're the masters of technology. Like all the midwives now, they have the butterfly. They use the butterfly. You know what I'm saying? They just plug that butterfly into their cell phone. They're verifying pregnancies at 7 weeks. They're checking vertexes. They're checking amniotic fluid. Now, do I agree with that? Well, that's a whole nother conversation about whether I think ultrasonography should be a part of midwifery. Like, we could have a whole session on that. Should it be a part of it?
Yeah, we could.
But it is.
Yeah.
It is. And it's like, oh yeah, fuck yes. Bring that out. Let's check and make sure this baby's vertex.
Yeah.
Let's look at the amniotic fluid volume ourselves. I don't want to look at that because the amniotic fluid volume changes every 20 minutes anyway. So let's see what our pockets look like. They got a pocket of 1.8 centimeters. They want to induce them. I mean, oh, come on. Let's, anyway.
Yeah. Well, the induction could be a whole nother session, but let me ask you this.
This is another thing that really bothers me. And
yeah, tell me.
And when I talk about erosion of skill, I remember when I was apprenticing with Judy Lane, in continuity of care, we'd be seeing this mama, toward the end every week. We would spend, an hour doing a prenatal, a lot of time palpating, and we would hedge our bets on the weight of the baby. And Judy would say, I think maybe about 8-1. I'd say, you know what? I think more like 7-11. We got so good at this that we could actually estimate fetal weight almost to the ounce and amniotic fluid volume. And we didn't need technology to help us do that. It was
Right.
part of how we learned. And that when I like I'm mentioning Budapest and mentioning being in Warsaw, this is not part of the skill set. When I tell this to these groups of midwives, they look at me with great skepticism, like either you're a freak or you're making it all up, which is not true.
You can calibrate your fingers to a great degree of sensitivity for sure, but it is an erosion of skill.
All the other content with palpating that's not about clinical assessment, like one of the exercises that I've done is once we get into it a little bit and I'm talking about observing the mom and connecting with the mom, I say, I want you to picture a pregnant woman that you're working with right now. And most of them are doulas or involved in pregnancy teaching in some way. I said, I want you to just close your eyes and picture this person just standing very relaxed in front of you, just standing. And then I want you to see where most of the energy is concentrated in her being, in her body. Where's her center of gravity? And when you see that spot, I want you to take your hand and put it on your own body where it's concentrated. And then I say, keep your hands there and then open your eyes. And, some people will have their hand here and some people will have it here. And a few people will have it down in the belly and the hips. And then I'll say, so where do you think the focus of energy, the balance of energy should be concentrated in pregnancy? And they'll say, well, probably kind of low in the body. And I'll say, what do you think it means when it's all up here? Or what do you think it means when it's all here? Does this person have something they need to say? Is this person worried? And the second takeaway, and maybe the most important one, is notice that you see more than you think you see. We see more than we've been taught not to see, but we see more than, just the same kind of thing on the scale of 1 to 10. I'll get up in front of a room of people and just sort of, it's scary, but I'll stand in front of them and say, all right, on a scale of 1 to 10, rate my vitality. Trust the first number that pops. They all know, they all agree. I mean, maybe within 1 point they see. And it's another example of the deeper aspect of our work that really is not clinical, but highly important.
And this goes back to why midwifery needs to be all ages, all stages, all, the history of midwifery was so much more than catching a baby.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of the pathway, is there anything that either of you wish you had done differently about your path to midwifery?
This is not about a path to midwifery, but sometimes I wish, because of a certain interest that I have and some talent that I have, having worked on legislation, having worked on organizational development, I wish I had a higher degree that would have placed me in positions to write policy. Sometimes I wish that, but not that much.
Not enough to go back to school.
No. Because I love teaching more than anything. And I've loved, helping birthing people. And I've done a lot of, non-pregnant client care. And I've done a lot of ritual too, a lot of ceremony for different life points, life change points, that I couldn't be happier with the honor that I've been given in this life to have this work to do. I'm good.
I agree with you, Elizabeth. I feel that I was called into midwifery and that my journey has been a very spiritual one. And it's really been my whole life. And so I have so much gratitude for the wisdom lineage and the lines, the midwifery wisdom lineages that have come before me, that I have received and I'm able to practice using and do ceremony from and create safe and sacred spaces for birthing people and students and learners and families. I just feel like that's bigger than anything. That's my work. That's my biggest work. I decided to get my nurse midwifery degree. So I left California in 1983 to go to midwifery school at Yale to get a master's in nurse midwifery. And while I was there, I apprenticed with a lay midwife, a home birth midwife, a Sikh midwife named Dev Kiran Khalsa and Anne Fry. So I met Anne Fry there, and Anne and I and Dave Kiran practiced together for years and years. We practiced together as I went through midwifery school and then after I got out of midwifery school. And what happened for me in my professional life was turned out that my sweet spot was bringing that home birth wisdom lineage that I learned from Ina May and from Elizabeth and all the clients I'd served and all the midwives I'd served over my first decade of training, just about, into an academic hospital setting. And I became recognized for that from early on, lecturing about intermittent auscultation when I was still a midwifery student because no one knew anything about it. And that just turned into my skill set. I spent 35 years building and practicing in academic environments and serving clients with a home birth wisdom model in a hospital setting and having really low cesarean delivery rates, having a breech initiative, doing midwifery-led VBAC. I mean, my work was so amazing and I loved it. And my regret is that I stayed too long. I stayed too long.
Tell me more.
I mean, it's such a long story, but it's because it's my life story. And I did talk about it at the first Midwifery Wisdom conference that we had.
Yeah.
One thing that happened was I had a stillbirth and then I had a home birth stillbirth. So that really changed me. And then I had my final child who was born with disabilities. And I stopped practicing clinically so I could save my daughter's life. She had 4 open heart surgeries in her first 5 years of life. And I was humbled by, I needed the medical establishment to save my daughter's effing life. And I had been like dukes up to the medical environment for decades of my life. And I was like bowing at the altar, neonatal cardiac surgery fucking saved my baby's life. So that was a huge teacher, and being out of practice for 5 years was really hard for me. It's not like I was completely out of practice because I still was kind of doing things here and there. But when I got back to midwifery, I was on a mission. I spent the next 15 years just solidly building wisdom midwifery with this model of care, with the pearls of physiologic birth and the Pinger patterns of labor and the breech initiative and the midwifery-led VBAC and the midwifery fellowship program and training the residents and teaching the medical students and teaching the midwifery students. And I overworked. I overworked and I overstayed. And I started recognizing it after Trump was elected. But because of the position I was in as really a matriarchal leader at the time in this completely male-dominated, capitalistic, patriarchal world, I couldn't go when my soul told me to. Like I had to work for almost 4 more years to get a leadership, to accomplish a successful leadership transition, to pass this on. And it was just too much. And I gave myself away. I didn't pay close enough attention to my soul. And I sustained a severe moral injury from that. And I'm still recovering from it. You know,
Mm.
I finally left academic. Well, I'm still, can't say I left academic medicine because I still maintain my clinical faculty appointment in the School of Medicine at GW. So I can continue to teach breech and teach midwifery-led VBAC and the pearls and the patterns and teach the students and the residents. But I can no longer practice in that patriarchal capitalistic institution. I cannot, but I had to do it for almost 4 years after my soul called me out of there. So that's a huge regret.
I certainly reached a point of burnout, but much earlier on, because I was involved in MANA, I was involved in, in NARM, in creating the CPM process, and then MEEK, and then starting a school. And I'm just so glad that I took better care of myself somehow than I imagined that I knew I could, you know. I want to get back to something that you said, because I think it's really important. And what it was talking about the lineage and imparting to students how we connect with that, or can connect with the midwifery lineage, what I call the well of midwifery, how that can happen at the most critical moments with that doozy of a shoulder dystocia or hard flowing hemorrhage. And it all starts with developing a healthy relationship to fear, so that when the fear comes upon you, which it will in those moments, the adrenaline can help you function. It's actually can help you complete your work. But it also something else that happens now that I understand the deeper physiology of birth, that as women the brain waves are going lower and lower in labor, and they're getting down into that theta place, which is the place where time becomes very elastic and ultimately doesn't exist, where the past, future, present are all possible. And in those crisis moments, if we've entrained to the birthing person and our brain waves too have gone into that deep space, we can access knowledge and skills and techniques that we never learned. You know, like the bilateral shoulder dystocia that I'd never read about in any textbook at that point. My hands, wow. And, you know, the next day you just go looking for this maneuver, if that's what it was, trying to find it. And it comes from that sacred well. And so does the ability to truly sit with grief. And so does the strength to advocate for our autonomy with not only passion and energy, but smarts, you know, like insight. You know, we don't have to bite people's head off. We can be strong and purposeful and discreet and effective when we have that depth to draw on. And if there's one thing I'm committed to teach my students, it's how to connect to that if they're not already connected.
Yeah, one thing I learned from an OB colleague of mine many years ago was telling our students, I'm going to teach you something, so that they receive, when you say, I want to teach you something, they actually receive it in a different way. They hear it, they feel it. If you say it in a way that penetrates their heart, and then you go to the lineage. You talk about planting your feet on the floor. You talk about breathing from the earth. You talk about the importance of your heart, your throat, your third eye, your crown in this moment, that all this energetic part of you is coming, it's sourcing from the midwifery well. It's sourcing from a long and deep, from the beginning of time lineage that you are now a part of.
Yeah.
So I'm going to teach you something. I'm teaching you right now that you are a part of this wise woman lineage. You are a part of the wisdom midwifery lineage that draws from this deep matriarchal well. And I say that not only to the midwifery students, I say it to the nurses, I say it to the doctors. You know, if they can stand and receive that information, we're all a part of it. All of this whole thing about doctors and nurses, that's just a crazy creation that has happened because of patriarchy. It's a crazy creation, and we have to smash that creation and level us all as receivers of this deep knowledge and as channelers of the deep knowledge?
I actually have said that I actually feel better received in my work outside of the United States. And in those situations, I guess because of the skills, the real desire to have solid skills for dealing with a posterior baby or, things that aren't being taught in most of the programs there. But I'm also getting mixed groups. Like in the group in Warsaw, I had a couple of OB students and there were nurses in the group. And the common denominator, I completely agree. When we are able to get into that zone ourselves and open the door, then it's such a place people want to go.
Right. And if they don't want to go there, right. And if they don't want to go there, you can ask them, if you don't want to come here, just step out, and that's fine. Just step out of the door. When I do breach in the hospital setting, I invite people to an opening the door ceremony in the birthing room. And anyone who wants to be involved in the birth and the labor has to come to the ceremony. And we do this opening the door ceremony, mind, body, and spirit, opening all the doors. And if anyone's uneasy, uncomfortable, not firmly grounded, they just can step out. And that creates that sacred container for that birth to happen safely. I truly believe that. We're the door openers because we're teaching that. We're teaching that capacity.
Just bowing. That's all I feel like doing right now. I'm so appreciative of both of you.
Well, I wanted to get on with something Elizabeth said that I wanted you to. And I think I probably learned this from you in the 80s, which was that one thing I always want to tell students is that your hands are divinely led. If you are in this, if you have created this sacred container, and if you are tapped into the well, that your hands, like what you were saying about the double shoulder dystocia, which I don't even know what you're talking about, but I really want to hear about it. But like that your hands were divinely led when you managed that. Like I have no idea how I did that. I have no idea, but I did that because some power larger than me, which I call the divine, whatever. I don't know what other people call it. It's the energy that comes through the well of midwifery. It is the wisdom lineage that is guiding us. And so like just this last weekend, I was teaching breach to a very mixed group of nurse midwives and CPMs and LMs and OBs and nurses. And at the beginning and the end, I just am talking to them about just trusting their hands, and trusting that they are being led, that they are intuitively going to know what to do to help that baby, that mother baby, if they need to.
Well, so this is a perfect segue. I just have a pointed question. What's the best piece of advice you received in your process, and from who?
I just feel like going back to this autonomy thing.
Yeah, Martin Wagner was a pretty incredible.
It really struck me, and it never unstruck me. And it really informed so much of my activism and work with developing the CPM. I mean, I actually was, that's too long a story, but let's just say that I called the first meeting to create the CPM. And we didn't do it from the top down, we did it from the bottom up. And, I got people to come from as many states as possible, and they brought their self-certification, their licensure, their whatever. And I said, we're going to sit in roundtables. We're going to talk about what works, what doesn't work. We're going to cut and paste and come up with a prototype. Then we're going to take it out to everybody for input, just like we did with our own certification in the Bay Area. Same thing. And the power of that, well, we came up with 5 different pathways for midwives to become a CPM, not just one. And I'm just going to put this out here. I mentioned this to you before in our interview, Augustine, the thing about our protocols. And this is a concern that I have because I know that whenever midwives get into trouble, do you know what standards they're held to? They're held to obstetrical standards of practice. That's the way they're judged. Our model of care, and especially in continuity of care, with attention to the health status of the whole person, and our, in my opinion, better skill set or more advanced skill set than many OBs have to deal with vaginal birth. I mean, there are many OBs that don't even know how to diagnose a posterior baby, let alone what to do about it. And if we have that kind of ability in continuity, and we can estimate the size of the baby, we can estimate the amniotic fluid, we have something so special. But could we get together and agree on it the way that we agreed on the CPM process? Just a core, this is what we do for this, and this is what we do for that. I think we have to do that. I really do. And I don't know that I'll see it in my lifetime, but at some point we're going to have to stand up and say, we're not OBs, we're not obstetrical nurses. Those of us that aren't working in the hospital that are lucky enough to do continuity of care, this is what it looks like. And here's the evidence to support this practice, or the particulars of what we do, because we really don't have anything to fall back on.
Yeah.
And midwives everywhere, their scope of practice is eroded, or they're challenged, or, the insurance companies get together with the OBs and say, like what happened in Germany, where so many births in birth centers and home births, until the OBs kind of persuaded the insurance companies, and the insurance companies then said, if you don't follow OB protocols, we're not going to insure you.
Yeah, it's been devastating. I have a number of German midwife friends, and like autonomous midwifery is basically no more. They can do prenatal care autonomously, and they can do postpartum lactation, but the birth is kind of out of their.
This is the big picture, and I always like try to plant the seed with my students, just to say, I don't think this is going to be my battle, but if you feel called to this work, hang in there and find your people, and really learn the importance, really autonomy. That's was the advice, kind of indirectly, but I took it to heart,
Yeah. Whitney, what about you? What was the best piece of advice you ever got, and from whom?
I think it was just early on to trust birth, to trust the physiologic and the magic and the deep knowing that's passed down from the beginning of time of the body, and to not expect that trust to come for clients in labor necessarily without preparation, like really preparing our clients for the mind, body, and spirit for this tremendous physiologic, emotional, spiritual transformation, and so trusting birth, teaching the deep connection stuff, and also I believe in the capacity for transformation through pregnancy, labor, and birth. Like I really, really believe in that, and that was taught to me by midwives early on, transformation through birth and mindful birthing, all these models that I think speak to the deeper, like go deep, like just go deep. That's what I think is the most important lessons. Go deep and trust.
Love that. Yeah. Hannah Dahlen, a midwife in Western Australia, has this great quote that men have to climb Everest to see their own potential, but women get to do it inside on their own. And I think this is perhaps the root of what's wrong with trying to keep alive this ancient art in the patriarchy, is that the controlling minds can't conceptualize of the fact that it's not external, it's internal.
Augustine, that is so well said.
She was the editor for that book that came out maybe 5 years ago, Birthing Outside the System, the canary in the coal mine. And she did a number of research studies and observational studies on the growing number of free births and how that is the indicator that the system is broken. I wonder if both of you would be willing to comment on that. It's a highly politicalized topic, and I understand if you don't want to go speaking about it. But to give a little preface, and I think this is not a topic that I am personally against. I had all 3 of my babies unassisted, is how it used to be called, and now it's called free birth and whatever. I'm deeply supportive of the autonomy and sovereignty of choosing where and with whom you have your baby, including choosing no one. Like, I'm deeply supportive of that. And yet, my understanding of what's happening right now in the political landscape of the US is actually not that. it's not unassisted birth, that there are lots of partially initiated birth attendants attending birth and calling it free birth. And I wonder if either of you have heard the rumblings or what's happening there. I know there are a number of poor outcomes associated with these cases.
I agree with you. I support free birth, conceptually at least. I've told that story of a mother in my community that wanted to free birth. And she saw me early in pregnancy. We established dates very easily. I saw her 20 weeks. She was spot on in terms of her uterine size. And she really didn't ask for my help until near the end of the pregnancy. And then she just wanted to know if the baby's head was down. And I showed her how to feel the head and how to feel amniotic fluid. And she then went to 42 weeks and called me and said, what should I do? And I, of course, said, well, what do you think you should do? And I taught her kick counts. I asked if she and her partner were still being intimate, looking at the oxytocin levels. In the end, she went to 44.5. And I couldn't wait to see this baby. And this baby was pink, plump, and term. And she said, well, my auntie went to 43 and my mama went to, almost 44. So I guess that's normal for me. Well, I guess it is. And in California, you don't get to do that. And that also speaks to the skill set of midwives, by the way, in terms of a post-dates protocol and how we would do things if we could. What I think is that when people choose to free birth, they're taking complete agency for the experience. When they have somebody else involved that's less skilled than a midwife, but is there because they need something more, they can't quite do the free birth all the way, that's precarious.
That feels really dangerous to me.
Yeah.
Especially because in our culture, we have this concept of what an attendant is or does or provides. It's very hard, even if the person really wants this low interventive birth, it's very hard for them to decouple from who is there and who is helping them, I think. And I think that alone supersedes some instinctual knowledge or knowing they might have otherwise. Yeah. I feel like free birth has to actually go back to what it was, which is like unassisted birth. I am birthing unassisted there, and that means nobody, right? I'm certainly not having a quasi-trained person or someone who represents that they have knowledge beyond me, because that is very tricky. Yeah. Whitney, what's your thought? You're actually in an area of the world where there's quite a few.
Yeah, what I'd say is I don't think we can go back to what free birth was. I think that kind of free birth, wild birth, whatever you want to call it, is I think it's still happening. And what I feel, what I feel and see is that birthing is on a continuum, and there are going to be people on one end of the continuum who want to birth unassisted, completely unassisted. And then on the other end of the continuum are people who are going to want to schedule a cesarean on demand by maternal request. And that there's so much space in the middle between those continuums of who people choose as providers and who they choose to work with or not work with, and who they trust and who they don't trust. And for me, my job, I feel as a midwife, is to be present for pregnant and birthing families, to help them, to support them, to discern what is right for them. And if it's birthing with their cousin who had a home birth last year and has been studying and reading up, she read spiritual midwifery, and that's how they feel safest and most autonomous and empowered, I support that. If they feel that they are going to birth with their partner or even birth completely alone, they have gone through a process of discerning what is authentically right for them, mind, body, and spirit, I support that. If a client wants to schedule a cesarean on demand by maternal request at 39 weeks, and they have discerned that that is what is right for them, I support that.
Yeah, I really respect that of you. I don't feel differently about that. And I feel like there's a group of half-initiated folks who are masquerading as midwives and maybe deceiving birthing people. And that is a hard reality. And I think less people want to talk about that reality, but I think that is happening. And I know of many challenging poor outcome cases. Pennsylvania just had 3 neonatal deaths in a row, and there was just a maternal death, uterine rupture in Arizona last year. And like there's like a number of cases with folks who are attendants but are like questionable. And then of course right on top of that, it's like that's how both of you started, is being unlicensed, illegal, renegade, radical, like whatever, but like it feels different. So
it is different. I mean, I cracked the books, boy. I mean, honestly, this is true, that the first round of CPMs had the best test scores and the lowest cesarean rate, and the vast majority of them didn't go to school because there were no schools.
Right.
So we were really motivated, and we were also really scared of having a bad outcome, because being in California, you went to jail, no question about it. So it was a dual thing, but also having already given birth twice, being a mom, just knowing the magnitude of that experience. And I expected excellence of myself. And I really feel the students that I'm getting into Heart and Hands, my introductory course, they expect it of themselves too. And that's a different mindset than I'm a doula and I read one book and I think I'll be good enough to be a midwife,
Birth keeper. That's the new phrase. Yeah. Well, yeah, it is such a complex area. I don't think we'll probably have an answer, but I feel it. I feel it so profoundly, and I don't know quite how to verbalize that something's different about what's happening out. And then on the other side, I know of multiple CPMs who have graduated and taken the test and have never caught a baby because their preceptor didn't think that was really safe. And I know of very qualified, long practicing students who've taken the test 5, 6, 7 times and failed it. And I'm having such a hard time reconciling, like, we can't even define what this is. We are not all playing by the same rules. There's no consensus, like you're saying, Elizabeth. And anyway, it brings up so many questions. I don't see a future because of this haziness.
What do you mean you don't see a future? Tell me what that means.
I'm very concerned about the future of midwifery, especially in the United States, but globally as well. I feel like we are maybe very potentially 1 or 2 generations from losing the wisdom that both of you carry. And I
definitely see that with nurse midwives. I mean, nurse midwives are like an entirely different breed.
Unless they go out and actually find this, they don't get it ever. And there are some amazing nurse midwives who practice at home. And there are some amazing non-certified, non-licensed midwives who practice in all parts of the world. And I don't think that licensure solves it. I don't think that even certification solves it. But I just see this erosion of skills, like Elizabeth said. I see this increase of technology, like Whitney said. I see this academicization, institutionalization of midwifery, and ultimately this fight between the dominant power, which is male-dominated obstetrics. Even if there are more females practicing obstetrics, they are still practicing it within the male paradigm. And I wonder how close we are to like losing this really precious knowledge base. I
mean, I can tell you at GW, for example, I brought midwifery to GW in 2009. And it was my practice, wisdom midwifery, that had been growing in DC for many years. And I brought it to GW, and we had this amazing decade of incredible outcomes and great statistics and client satisfaction. And I left in 2020. There are 2 midwives there now. It doesn't exist. GW midwifery doesn't exist. So that can happen in 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, look at all the birth
An
centers that just closed in
institutional
California.
culture. Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
all
it
the
can
birth
just-
centers closing, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I am very afraid about the future of midwifery between the increased, you know, there's one thing we haven't touched on, and I'm really interested in Elizabeth's opinion about this, but this is I want to say the work ethic, but the commitment to work that that I certainly had, of going above and beyond, and that led to overworking. I see midwives now who are saying, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
They're not,
Yeah.
they're
It's
not,
both. Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
not going to do that. They don't want to be up all night. They want to send them to the hospital if things aren't progressing 10 o'clock in, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know how midwifery continues if people want to work 6 to 8 hour shifts.
Yeah. Or even 12-hour shifts.
Or even 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
And yeah.
Just,
Yeah. I don't know.
What do I think about that? There's a book that I contributed to, and it was edited by Robbie Davis Floyd. And my chapter was sustainable midwifery. And one of the things, I talked about the principles of the holistic model of care, that we always give the power back to our clients. And we try very hard not to give advice. If they say, what should I do? We say, what do you think you should do? And what it means to front load your prenatal care, to cover the bases and go so in depth and get into that well area, so that the births just tend to go a whole lot better. They just do, where you might have had marathon, 2-3 day labors. Now people are calling you, initially, and then again when they're active and you're there and very little is needed, and maybe, less time spent in that process and more ability to design your model of care in terms of things you can control, like when you do your prenatals. And so I think there are ways to approach it. I think that if you are connected to midwives that share your philosophy, there's nothing wrong ultimately with working in a coupleship or a triad, so that you can have one, a week off every 2 or 3 weeks. That can make a big difference. And if you're well aligned and you agree and you debrief after prenatals and debrief after births and really stay connected and update your documents to be truthful about who you are now and what you offer now, that could be done. So yes, but then now that we've made it a career choice, people aren't necessarily feeling that deep personal calling that we did. That's a shame.
Yeah. And then we could talk about how financially unsustainable it is because the payer sources aren't reimbursing, and then it becomes a systemic issue. It's just so layered, right?
Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, specifically, I know you travel a lot and teach in a lot of areas, as do I. And I wonder if you have any light, and certainly Whitney, if you have any insight here too, about the parts or the countries of the world that are getting this right and feel like they're bringing some hope back to midwifery. Do you have any area of the world that's happening that we should be studying?
I think Scandinavian countries are doing pretty well.
Although Swedish midwives just lost insurance reimbursement for home birth.
Oh God.
You're kidding.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
That's incredible. I did not know that.
Yep. The parents, it's still legal. They can pay out of pocket, but it's not covered by state insurance anymore.
See, I don't know about Finland and Norway. But
How about Netherlands
I
and-
would look there first.
Yeah.
European
Heard
countries.
from a New Zealand midwife that apparently New Zealand midwifery is going down the toilet as well, which is like so depressing because that's been another one that we held up.
Are one of the best. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and the World Health Organization, I don't know, you guys have seen, I'm sure you've seen this new report that came out, Transitioning to the Midwifery Model of Care, a global position that came out by World Health.
Yeah.
It's a 60-page document, that wants to transition. I mean, it's like, what is a midwife? What do midwives do? What are the midwifery models of care? It's like, it's a more of the same of what I was talking about reinventing the wheel. But it's like super important part of it. And yet at the same time that the World Health Organization is pushing for this, midwifery is, you said, dying in New Zealand. I mean, that's just so hard for me to believe. I mean, that just makes me so unhappy.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of midwives there. I don't think the profession is dying, but the practice, right?
Yeah.
No autonomy, lack of continuity of care, lack of individualized decision making, like the things that we would hold as paramount ideals of midwifery seem to be eroding everywhere. I wonder if there's any place that's making inroads that we should be following.
Well, check out Norway and check out Finland. Finland, especially.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
And the Netherlands, I mean, I think that the Netherlands have a pretty good model. That's always been held up.
Their model got messed up.
Yeah.
Women,
It's not like to be.
no,
Really?
every woman would go initially to a midwife, and only if the midwife identified a risk would she be seen by an OB. Now that's heaven,
Yeah, so that's changed now?
Yeah, it changed because the docs and the insurance company again got together and they cooked up a little strategy that wasn't fair, that women should be given a choice. They can choose an OB if they want. And the way that coincided with the rise in epidural and overworked midwives being so burned out that they finally said, we won't even go until you're active. Well, maybe you can do that for, a multi, but you're certainly not, first-time moms will probably need you sooner, especially if you're doing shorter and shorter prenatals. So no, that the whole thing there has really changed.
I didn't know that.
I want to give you light because Augustine, that is one of your great qualities that you always, try to find the light. And you've raised some really big questions and very important ones.
Really big.
And I just keep hoping that the next generation is going to cook something up.
Totally. Me too. My current obsession is Australia. They're having a real renaissance and revolution. They just had a major home birth symposium, midwifery symposium, and they just passed a really important law. Now they've reversed insurance policy for a long time. Now it does cover home birth. And more than that, there is no risk status associated with the insurance reimbursement. So like if the midwife and the mom decide to do a home breech birth, they can still have it covered. And if they decide to do a double VBAC, they can still have it covered. So that Australia is the one I've got like a lot of hope on. There's some amazing midwives doing amazing things.
I think Nikki Leap, did she have a hand in this? Is she still around?
I think so. I think there's a number of people. Mm-hmm.
She had that incredible model in the UK where people could work with a midwife during their pregnancy and at the time of labor could decide whether they wanted to go into the hospital or just go ahead and have the baby at home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, definitely there were risk factors considered in the care model, but the choice, if it was available and reasonable, could be made on the spot. Imagine that.
Yeah.
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 So, yeah. And she might move to Australia, so I could feel her hand in this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my last kind of question for both of you is, what are you working on now? What's your current passion project?
I'm doing some writing. I wouldn't exactly call it a memoir, but you know, so, some writing along those lines. I just really want to do more international work. I really feel that that is where I belong right now. I mean, I'll be teaching my Heart and Hands beginner course because I love it. And it works. At least it seems to. My gosh, I've been teaching it since '82, nonstop. People keep coming to me, and I've
Wow.
grown in it, and it has just been the most beautiful gift. Um,
Where
but
do you teach it on Zoom now, Elizabeth?
yeah, I do because
Oh,
I have a larger audience, but I'm live on Zoom, and so I've got the pelvis out, and I'm showing the various, I'm taking my time walking people through questions, small groups. All the skills are step by step, almost like follow along. The students follow along. I'll say, now put your hand in this, try this hand maneuver because this, or whatever it is, that kind of way I've worked it.
That's cool.
But in international work, when I have like a 2 or 3 day advanced midwifery format where I can go through all of this, all the skills that they probably have not been taught, and they're so excited. Um, and I can only hope they find a way to use them. So and I love travel.
Mhm.
As long as I can maintain it, because 11-hour flights are starting to bother me a little bit.
How about you, Whitney?
I have a few things going on. One is my practice has transitioned into, I've been doing a lot of leading what's called wisdom journeys, which are journeys for people to sort of process their births and see how their births connect to previous trauma and to support them to give birth to the next phase of their life. So these wisdom journeys are I did some of it while I was still practicing, but this is something that's taken hold of my heart and been amazing work to do, deep, deep work. That led me into wanting to go back to school to study consciousness and expanding states of consciousness. So I did enroll in a program at UC Berkeley in 2022, and I trained in psychedelic facilitation, and I did that. And I am now a TA in that program. Midwife in consciousness is it's an aspect of my ongoing learning. I think it's a fair way to say it. I still practice clinically. I still do home and birth center births with Birth Care in Virginia. I'm transitioning my base to California. So I actually just joined a practice with a CPM in Berkeley, California to do some home births and to
Very
provide
cool.
well woman care. And I'm also teaching with Breech Without Borders. So I'm teaching breech birth. So I always had a breech initiative as part of Wisdom Midwifery. And I really believe in teaching breech birth. And so I trained with Breech Without Borders with Christine and just taught my first workshop by myself without another Breech Without Borders instructor in California, my homeland. So I just feel like I'm coming home to California after being away for a long time. And I'm really grateful. And I've agreed to work, to teach for Breech Without Borders in the Western states.
Amazing.
And I did get to catch my grandson this year in Nairobi. My son who was born at home partnered with a woman whose mother had had 3 C-sections. So I didn't know what they were going to do, but they decided to have a home birth with a Kenyan midwife, and they invited me to attend, and I was able to be involved and catch my grandson's second generation home birth, Leo, and my second son, Jesse, and his partner, Sarah, and their family are expecting a baby in March here in Berkeley. So I'm going to attend them as well. So that feels like this beautiful phase of my life that's open. It's another open door.
So beautiful. I love that full circle.
Full circle.
Yes. Well, thank you both so much. This has been just such an honor to hear your wisdom, and I know that so many people will benefit from your past, present, and future work. Thank you so much for your hearts.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
thank you. I mean, Augustine, I just want to say what you've done with the Midwifery Wisdom Collective, I'm so grateful for your work. And I know it's been exhausting and tiring and just mind-boggling, psychedelic craziness. I know because I follow along. And I just wanted you to know that as a midwife who trained in the wisdom lineage from the deep midwifery well, that I'm so grateful for you walking in your incarnate body on this earth right now doing this work. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to say that you do it really well, Augustine. You're a wonderful interviewer. You're so insightful and so positive. Your energy is so refreshing and direct, but respectful and kind. And you really model these sacred qualities of the midwife so well. It makes such a difference to all of us because you do really great job of creating community just by who you are. So thank you.
Deeply honored. Thank you both.